Ashram of Saint Ramana at Arunachala drew crowds of devotees on September the 1st to mark the completion of 50 years since Ramana first set foot on the sacred soil of this historic mountain shrine. From far and near they flocked for darshan of the holy sage, who by the severest austerities and profound contemplation has attained spiritual wisdom and serenity unique in the country. Thousands draw comfort from his mere presence, for he neither preaches nor blames, setting at ease all who come to him by the essential goodness he radiates to all around. A good man in a troubled world.
In the small town of Tiruchuri, 30 miles from Madurai in South India, Arudra Darshan, a celebration of Lord Shiva, is performed annually with great religious fervor. On December 29, 1879, devotees had taken the Shiva Nataraja image out from the famed Bhuminatha temple and were parading the deity in the streets of Tiruchuri. Late at night, about 1 a.m., when the festivities were concluding and the image was being carried back into its sanctuary, a small, sharp cry of a newborn babe was heard just outside the temple wall. The boy, Venkataraman, later to be acclaimed by the world as Bhagavan Sri Ramana Maharshi, was born. Venkataraman was the second of 4 children born to Aragamal and Sundaramayer. Sundaramayer was a successful pleader in court and a self-made man. He was renowned throughout the area for his generosity and wisdom. The house he built stands as a testimony to this. It was built in 2 separate units, providing an equal amount of space for guests and pilgrims as for his own family. Today, this house is maintained as a shrine where daily worship is performed and pilgrims often visit. Sundaramayer commanded respect and reverence from even robbers who would withdraw from attacking his cart when it passed at night. His wife, Arigamal, was a hard-working and gracious Orthodox homemaker. Her innate spirituality later became known as it blossomed under the direct guidance of her son in the evening of her life. The boy, Venkataraman, attended the local elementary school like other boys of his age and status. He sometimes played by the Kaundinya River on the outskirts of town. In later years, he was once heard to reminisce. We used to bathe in the Kaundinya River, pour a vessel of water on the linga in the nearby Kaliyar temple, offer food, then eat it. The children of the village adjacent to the temple used to join us there. We would play together till nightfall and then go home. Thus, 12 years of boyhood happily passed for Venkataraman. In 1891, he was sent for higher schooling to relatives in Dindigul, where he attended Dindigul Municipal High School. This larger town is about 70 miles north of Tiruchuri. He was living in this house for less than 1 year when the ominous news of his father's serious illness reached him. He immediately returned home, and within a few days, on February 18th, 1892, his father died. With no man to lead the household or adequate income to maintain it, Venkataraman's family was divided among relatives. He and his older brother went to live with their paternal uncle, Subba Iyer, in Madurai. Arunachala, her daughter and youngest son, went to stay with other relatives in a nearby town. Madurai, which is known for the famous Meenakshi temple, is a large, bustling city. Venkataraman first joined the Scots Middle School, and by the time he advanced to the American Mission High School, it became clear to all that this boy would never be a scholar. He preferred games and athletic activities. If it wasn't for his amazing retentive memory, the neglect he showed toward his studies would have definitely alarmed his guardians. In fact, nothing to this point in his life revealed any real purpose or meaning to him. Swimming in the Vegay River and competing in sports was a happy diversion for him, especially since he was blessed with health, strength, and coordination, enabling him to excel all others. The first premonition of the boy's unusual destiny exhibited itself in November 1895, just before his 16th birthday. One day, when meeting an elderly relative and asking him where he was coming from, Venkataraman was astonished to hear him reply, "From Arunachala." He knew of Arunachala as being a very sacred place, but it never occurred to him one could actually go there. The second premonition came soon after. His uncle had borrowed a book of the 63 Tamil saints titled Periyapuranam. Venkataraman picked it up and, as he read it, was overwhelmed with ecstatic wonder that such faith, such love, such divine fervor was possible, that there had been such beauty in life. The tales of renunciation leading to divine union inspired him with awe and emulation. The climax came only a few months later. Venkataraman was in the upstairs room of his uncle's house when the great change in his life took place. In fact, it was quite sudden. A violent fear of death overcame him. In spite of good health, and without crying out for help, he just felt, "I'm going to die." This shock drove him inward, and he was totally absorbed in the vital questions demanding to be answered. What does death mean? What is dying? It is the body that dies. He dramatized the event by imitating the state of rigor mortis, lying stiff, holding back breath and voice like one dead. His body would be carried to the burning grounds and reduced to ashes. Yet he thought, I still feel the full force of my personality and even the voice of the I within me, apart from the body. He experienced that he was the supreme spirit transcending the body. The body dies, but the spirit cannot be touched by death. He was granted the certainty that he was the death stand for a long time alone, motionless before the images of Shiva or Meenakshi or Nataraja and the 63 saints. As he stood there, waves of emotion would overwhelm him. The crisis came on August 29th, 1896, some 2 months after the awakening. Venkataraman was attempting to write out an English grammar lesson when the futility of the exercise struck him so forcibly that he pushed the papers away, sat cross-legged, and abandoned himself to meditation. His elder brother, sitting nearby and observing this, rebuked him, saying, "What use is all this to such a one?" Recently, he had often scolded him because of his indifference to responsibilities, and pointed out that if he insisted on acting like a renunciate or sadhu, what is the use of staying here and playing the role of a student? This time, Venkataraman recognized the truth of his words, and the moment the thought came as to where to go, Arunachala leaped into his consciousness. Shortly after, he rose and told his brother he had to attend a special class on electricity. Unconsciously providing the funds for the journey, his brother replied, "Then take 5 rupees from the box downstairs and pay my college fees on the way." Proceeding downstairs, his aunt served him a meal, which he ate hastily. He was given the 5 rupees, and then he quickly glanced through an outdated map to locate the nearest train station to Tiruvannamalai. He saw it was Tindavanam, although a railway line had recently been constructed to Tiruvannamalai, where the Arunachala mountain is located. Placing the following note in a cupboard, he left, not for his school, not to pay the college fees, but for the quest. "I have set out in quest of my father in accordance with his command. It is on a virtuous enterprise that this has embarked. Therefore let none grieve over this act, and let no money be spent in search of this. Your college fees have not been paid. 2 rupees have been enclosed herewith." Reaching the train station, looking up the table of fares, he quickly located Tindavanam. Had he looked closer, he would have seen the town Tiruvannamalai, but he was already late for the noon departure. Purchasing his ticket and rushing to the platform, he was relieved to find the train had not even come into the station. Once on his way, Venkataraman sat silent among the passengers, lost in the exaltation of his quest. After passing several stations, a bearded Muslim pundit asked him where he was going. A discussion ensued, which resulted in his realizing he could change trains at Villapuram Junction and board another for Tiruvannamalai itself. Before dawn the next day, he arrived at Villapuram Junction. When morning broke, he walked into town and looked for road signs for Tiruvannamalai, as he now thought of walking the distance. Unable to find his way and feeling tired and hungry, he sat near a restaurant waiting for it to open. After eating, he returned to the railway station and bought a ticket to Mambalapattu, which was as far as his remaining money would take him. He reached Mambalapattu in the afternoon and from there walked along the railway lines toward his destination. A 10-mile walk took him as far as Tirukoilur. It was now evening, and before him was the ancient temple of Arayaninalur, built on a large rock. It was at this spot the glorious saint Jnana Sambandar first glimpsed the holy Arunachala hill over 1,000 years ago. Soon after Venkataraman reached the temple, a priest opened the doors to perform the evening worship. The boy entered, sat in a pillared hall, and immediately beheld a brilliant light pervading the whole temple. After rising and searching to find out from where this light emanated, he soon realized it was from no physical source. He again sat absorbed in meditation, only to be roused by the temple cook, who asked him to leave, for they were locking the temple doors. Being hungry and tired, Venkataraman asked for food and permission to stay. He was refused both requests and was given the suggestion to follow them to the Kirur temple across the river, where he may be given food after the worship there. Reaching the temple, he again sat and was plunged into deep absorption. At 9 p.m., the worship was finished and supper was served. He again requested food, and this time the temple drummer, who was impressed with his appearance and devout manner, gave him his own share. By now he had become very tired. He took his leaf plate of food in hand and was led out to a nearby house to obtain some water. While waiting for the water, he collapsed in a faint or sleep. A few minutes later, he came around, drank some water, ate some food, and then lay down on the grass to sleep. Next morning was Monday, August 31st, the birth anniversary of Sri Krishna. When Venkataraman woke, he walked about looking for the road and began feeling tired and hungry again. Tiruvannamalai was still 20 miles away. He stopped at this house near the Kirur temple to beg for food, and the mother of the home warmly responded to this bright-looking boy on this holy day of Sri Krishna. Venkataraman was wearing the traditional ruby-set earrings worn by Brahmin boys, which were worth some 20 rupees. Remembering this, he offered it to the head of the household for a loan of 4 rupees, enabling him to complete his journey by train. The transaction completed and addresses exchanged so he could later reclaim his property, the pilgrim departed. Leaving the temple, Venkataraman wandered out into the town. He made his way to Ayankulam tank, into which he threw whatever possessions he had, including about 3.5 rupees in change. That was the last time he ever touched money. Removing his lower garment, he tore off a strip to use as a loincloth and cast the remainder into the tank. Someone, noticing the lad's apparent mood of renunciation, amusingly suggested to him to have the barber remove his hair also. He agreed. Returning to the temple, and just before entering the main gate, a short, hard shower of rain burst down on him. This rain bath, he thought, was sufficient compliance to the scriptural injunction of bathing before taking up the life of an ascetic. All formalities completed, Venkataraman entered the temple and took up his abode in the 1,000-pillared hall. He sat, giving himself up to total absorption in the bliss of being. Day by day, day and night, he sat unmoving. For some weeks he continued so, lost in ecstasy, never speaking. A saint known as Seshadri Swami, who had arrived in Tiruvannamalai a few years earlier, began looking after the Ramana Swami, as Venkataraman was now called. Schoolboys, seeing another boy about their own age, sitting mute, half human-like, began making mischief by throwing stones at him, among other things. Seshadri Swami's attempts to keep them off were not very successful. So Brahmana Swami sought refuge in the Patala Lingam, an underground cellar shrine in the 1,000-pillared hall. In those days, This vault was neglected and seldom visited by humans, but the ants, vermin, and mosquitoes flourished in its dark, damp atmosphere. In this corner, they preyed upon the boy's flesh until his thighs were covered with sores that ran blood and pus. To the end of his life, the marks remained. The few weeks he spent there was a descent into hell, and yet, absorbed in the bliss of being, he was unmoved by the torment. It was unreal to him. One day a pious man, seeing boys throwing stones into that cellar, became indignant and chased them away. Entering the vault, he was horrified to discover the ill-kept youth who sat unaware of his surroundings. Ramana Swami was then bodily carried out and placed in the nearby Subramanya shrine. One Mona Swami began looking after him. Sometimes nourishment had to be put into his mouth, as he paid no attention when it was offered him. For some weeks he did not even trouble to tie his loincloth. After a few weeks, he moved out to the temple garden, then later to the hall of the temple vehicles, later again under a tree near the temple wall. In this way, for nearly 6 months, he resided within the great temple. He remained almost always completely absorbed in a blissful trance. He would even move about in this trance, for on waking to the world, he would sometimes find himself under a different bush with no recollection of how he got there. The festival of Kartikeya, falling in November or December, would lure thousands of pilgrims to Arunachala annually. Ramana Swami began to attract much attention and devotion from these pilgrims, who saw in him a pinnacle of renunciation and union with God. A sadhu attending to Ramana Swami tried to keep off the crowds of sightseers, meeting with only partial success. Some time passed with no relief from the onlookers, so another suggested the Swami would be less disturbed if he left the temple and moved to Guru Murtam, a shrine on the outskirts of town. By way of gesture, Ramana Swami consented. In February of 1897, about 6 months after his arrival in Tiruvannamalai, he left the Arunachala temple for Guru Murtam. There was no change in his mode of life. He would sit in this shrine, his mind and senses merged in the divine. He would eat only 1 cupful of food daily and never speak. Others thought he was observing a vow of silence, but it was not so. He simply had no desire to speak or attend to the needs of his body. His hair grew long and matted. His body was crusted with dirt, and because of lack of nourishment, he had difficulty raising himself when he needed to go out. It was here that a sincere devotee, Ramana Swami, attached himself to the young sage. He consecrated the rest of his life to his service, remaining his attendant for 21 years. The owner of a neighboring mango orchard noticed the number of pilgrims and sightseers increasing, causing some disturbance. He offered his fenced-in orchard as an alternative residence. In May 1898, after a little more than a year at Guru Murtam, Ramana Swami and his attendant moved into the orchard. The mango trees have long since been cut, and the land is now used for growing rice. But the sanctity derived from the young sage's residence will prevent these grounds from receding into obscurity. About the time Venkataraman moved to the orchard, his uncle in Madurai died. It was at his funeral that the bereaved family received news that their runaway boy was now a revered Swami in Tiruvannamalai. Arunachala anxiously sent her late husband's other brother, Nelliyappa Iyer, to bring the boy back. After arriving in Tiruvannamalai with a friend, Nelliyappa Iyer was deeply moved to see his nephew in such an exalted state, but distressed at his physical condition. He pleaded with the boy to return to his family. The Swami remained silent and indifferent, and his uncle returned home disappointed. 6 months quietly passed in the mango orchard. Then the Swami decided to live alone and beg his food in town. He moved to this Arunagirinathar temple. Paranaswami, his attendant, insisted on following him. After a month here and another month in the Arunachala temple, he went up to Pavarakunru, one of the eastern spurs of the Arunachala mountain. He stayed in the temple there and continued to sit, as before, immersed in the bliss of being. It was here, near the end of 1898, where Arunachala found her son. The mother walked up the stairs to her son's abode, and she immediately recognized him, despite his wasted body and matted hair. Day after day she beseeched him, entreated, begged, and even reproached him for not returning home. The boy sat unmoved. In final desperation, she burst into uncontrollable tears. The boy walked away lest his compassion should show and give her false hopes. In the end, he wrote on a piece of paper, "The ordainer controls the fate of souls in accordance with their prarabdha karma. Whatever is destined not to happen will not happen, try as you may. Whatever is destined to happen will happen. Do what you may to prevent it. This is certain. The best course, therefore, is to remain silent." The mother resigned herself to his firm resolve and left. Shortly after the mother left, the Swami moved up on the hill just above the great temple. As varying circumstances dictated, he moved from cave to cave on this slope until 1922, although his primary residence till 1916 was the Virupaksha cave. This dwelling that contains the remains of the 13th century saint Virupaksha has a small stream running next to it. Unfortunately, in the summer months, the cave becomes oppressively hot and the stream dries up. During this hot period, the Swami and his followers would move to the nearby mango tree cave, which was somewhat cooler and had adjacent to it a perennial supply of water. In 1900, soon after his move onto the hill, the first portrait photo of the young Swami was taken. we see a beautiful youth, almost childlike in appearance, yet radiating the strength and profundity of a sage. During the early years on the hill, the Swami continued to maintain silence. His radiance had already drawn a group of devotees around him, and an ashram had come into being. He occasionally wrote out explanations or instructions for his disciples, but his not speaking did not impede their training, for his most effective instruction was imparted in silence. Merely by sitting in his presence, restless minds came under control, and long-sought spiritual experiences manifested of their own accord. This penetrating and transforming silence became the hallmark of the young sage. The first Western visitor, F.H. Humphreys, an English police officer, described its effect in a letter to a friend in England. On reaching the cave, we sat before him at his feet and said nothing. We sat thus for a long time, and I felt lifted out of myself. For half an hour I looked into the Maharshi's eyes, which never changed their expression of deep contemplation. I could feel only that his body was not the man. It was the instrument of God, merely a sitting, motionless corpse from which God was radiating terrifically. My own feelings were indescribable.